Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are, what time you are watching this. My name is Winston, the content marketing guy. And today I have brought back a very special guest, very good friend of mine, fellow marketer, Mrs. Kerry-Ann Betton Stimpson. And, for those of you who already don't know, I mean, you probably should because she's all over LinkedIn, but just in case you don't, has several years experience in the financial services industry, serving as VP of marketing for some of the most reputable financial institutions in the region. And she's currently the chief marketing officer of JMMB. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. What we really want to talk about is the topic on hand, which, she has a podcast as well that she started called the Internal Marketing Podcast. We really want to talk about that, about employee advocacy, brand advocacy, and how it actually helps organizations build and be successful. So, Kerry-Ann, welcome again. You're actually the first guest I've had twice on the podcast. So that's a new. You're setting the trend.
And I haven't transferred any money to your bank account. So I know I'll take that as a big compliment. Thanks for having me back, Winston. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it's always a pleasure having conversations with you, and definitely know that. So, I mean, let's not delay. Let's just jump right into it. The first thing I really wanted to start with is this whole notion of internal marketing, because when people talk about marketing, they talk about, how can we do branding, PR, advertisement, the whole works to actually generate new business and customers for an organization. But internal marketing is a different game, pretty much the same approach, I would think, but it's just for a different audience. So talk us through that of exactly what it is and why organizations should be doing it.
Thanks, Winston. And that's a great question. And again, yes, I'm very passionate about that. So internal marketing, as I like to explain it, is the flip of external marketing. So as you rightly said, when we think of marketing, we're talking to customers, basically to get them to buy our stuff, right? So we can make some money and make the shareholders happy. But what internal marketing says is, look, we're forgetting a key constituent in this equation. And that constituent or those constituents are our employees. Because if we think about it, we can't be anything or anywhere as a company without our employees. We can't serve our customers who we're trying to get to buy from us without our employees. And so what internal marketing really focuses on is taking that same marketing juice, those same marketing principles, more or less, and turning the spotlight on our employees in a way that gets them to understand and buy in to the vision and the mission of the company. So it's not necessarily to market to our employees to get them to buy stuff from us, although that's probably not a bad thing. It means we get more customers, but it's really about how are we engaging our employees to get them to buy in and align with the vision and the mission and what we're all about as a company, including everything that we sell and offer, so that ultimately not only are they aligned with that, but they can advocate or promote the brand on their own through their own particular network. So that's really what internal marketing is. It's just kind of taking external and flipping it towards the employee.
Okay, but some people would argue though that they don't need to do that it's enough the fact that these employees, they have a job, they're getting paid, so they should be doing these things even without being asked or even without being incentivized, if you will, to actually do those things. So why is it important, and what would be, I would say, in this environment or landscape that we're in, both the pros of doing it but also the cons of not doing it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to answer that question. I think it's a great question because a lot of companies do think that way. When we stop and think about it, though, I like to say, I heard this saying a long time ago, and I still believe that it applies today, is that people ultimately work for themselves, right? Even though they work for your company and you pay them a salary and it helps them to pay their bills and feed themselves and their families, people ultimately work for themselves. And so when you talk about having employees who not only really work for you, okay, they take that widget and they move it from here to here and they're well trained perhaps and they follow instructions well. There's a whole different level in terms of how employees are serving your clients or the kind of experience they deliver. When you see the difference between employees who are just trained and are doing it by rote to employees who have some kind of emotional connection and again buy into that vision and mission. There's a real difference in terms of how they execute their jobs, you know, and we talk about great brands like Southwest Airlines, anybody who's ever flown them, you go into an Apple store, the experience that you get in those sorts of interactions with brands where you really see employees or team members who are totally aligned with what that brand stands for. What lands on the customer is a deeper, more intimate level of authentic engagement than just employees who, you know, okay, I'm told to say good morning, and then the next thing in the script, and they're just kind of following it through. Internal marketing really recognizes that, and that's, I think, where more companies rather need to tune into, is the fact that it really is not just about training your employees to do something. It's recognizing that in a time when we have to be authentic in how we engage our communities and our customers, what are we doing to make sure that our employees are really authentically bought into that, so that when they deliver on that experience, or even if they design that experience, it's something that really is aligned with the brand and the customers feel it all the way through to the end.
Right. And I want to unpack that a bit because obviously, all right, let's say there's an organization that, you know, through your argument just now, you've somehow convinced that, yes, this sounds like something that we should be doing. But of course, when it comes to organizations, it's all about the P&L, it's all about the bottom line, it's all about cost benefit analysis in terms of, well, you know, based on the amount that we have to invest in this versus the risk, is it worth the revenue that it may generate, or not necessarily revenue but even market share? So probably you can walk us through, if there's a way that you can think about, like, how can organizations make this, I don't want to use the word profitable, but I mean, just to get customers, because at the end of the day, that's the argument that they're going to make, that, well, yeah, this sounds nice and fluffy and rainbows and sprinkles, but how is it helping us make money? So probably you could walk us through that.
Yeah. So, you know, let's keep it real. Making money is why we're in business. Okay. Ultimately, that for a for-profit organization, that's why they're in business. So there's really no shame in having that dollars and cents conversation. And in fact, internal marketing really supports that. Internal marketing that drives to the ultimate end game of having strong employee advocacy programs, or a strong employee advocacy program in place, really drives to the heart of what is really a great ROI. So when you think about it, again, you're trying to reach the external customer, right? When you think of traditional marketing, you're talking about advertising, okay? Majorly expensive. Even if you want to talk about, well, digital advertising, social media advertising is far less expensive. Even in those instances, it's money that you're still having to spend, right? Then you talk about, well, as a brand, we're trying to build a community. We're trying to reach out to people. So even if you have a company LinkedIn page or Twitter page, Instagram, what have you, organic reach sucks, right? So
Right.
when you even talk about trying to establish and build your community as a brand, it's not the easiest thing to do. A couple of brands have done it very, very well, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And what you've really found is that in the context of organic reach being so abysmal, what you've really found is that people prefer to connect with people as well. So let's forget what happened pre-pandemic. Okay, we don't even probably remember what life was like back then. But here we are coming out of a pandemic, knock wood, where people are so much more desirous of want to connect with other people. And, you know, people talk about human to human marketing. That's what internal marketing drives that. And when we talk about ROI, internal marketing at the core of it ultimately leads to how can we leverage our employees in their own individual personal networks to help us build a brand and drive sales through the generation of viable leads. Okay. And what does that look like? So we spoke about, I have my company page on LinkedIn and nobody cares. Nobody really wants to engage. But if I have Winston, who is an employee of my company, Winston has like 2,000 friends and family on Facebook. He got 1,000 people on Instagram. Even if he got 200 on LinkedIn, Winston has a network of family, friends, and colleagues who already know Winston. They trust Winston. Winston works for my company. If I have done a good enough job of engaging Winston, not only in terms of training him to get the job done, but Winston is really bought into what we stand for as an organization and really wants to use the opportunity now to provide valuable content to his community on social media. So let's say I'm a financial institution, we sell mortgages. Winston is putting out great content that says, this is how you can, buy a house, 10 things they don't tell you about taking out a mortgage. And he's sending that out. He's not selling. He's not pushing the company brand directly. He's just providing valuable content to his personal network of people that trust him. That is, if not next to free, very low cost, because we're not advertising. Right. We're not trying to get inorganic reach. Okay. We're really just leveraging the organic reach that Winston gets from his personal connections to his network. And we're talking about very, very low cost and great return, because what's going to happen is because people trust Winston, when they think of buying that house and taking out that mortgage, it's like, Winston keeps putting up these posts about taking out a mortgage. Doesn't he work with that bank? I'm going to reach out to Winston and ask if he can hook me up with somebody that I can have a conversation to apply for a mortgage. You get what I'm saying? Because They know you, they trust you. And again, the company brand goes along for the ride. Okay. And so that's where the ROI is so awesome with internal marketing that leads to employee advocacy, is that you're leveraging the personal brands of your employees in a way that is authentic. They trust him already. They are getting valuable content that's not silly. People don't like when you throw a sales pitch down their throat. And when people are ready to take that buying journey, they remember Winston, they trust his opinion, they'll reach out to him. And again, the company brand goes along for the ride. So if you can use 50 Winstons in your company, 100 Winstons, 10 Winstons, who all have their networks and reaching out and putting their tentacles out there, and again, great valuable content that's powerful, that's not silly, and the company brand gets to go along for the ride, that's ROI for you, because you're getting those leads. You're not spending a ton on advertising. It's really just about how are you engaging and empowering your employees to do that.
Right, and that's true, because as you mentioned, LinkedIn company pages. One name immediately came to mind, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which is Refine Labs. And about 2 hours ago, before we actually came on to record this podcast, one of its employees actually put out something, and in it was, I guess, some data around the company pages on LinkedIn where their employees engage and post content on LinkedIn the most, and their brand was on the very top. Mm-hmm. And it's not a huge brand in terms of the number of employees. I think it's just 30 people based on what Chris said actually works there. But I mean, if you look on the results that they're driving for their business, because you have Chris who's putting out content, but of course, there's Megan that's also putting out content, MJ Peters who puts out content. And the first thing that someone does when you put out content that's valuable, the first thing you're going to do is go and click on that person's profile to say, let me see what this person does. And every single time you'll see the name Refine Labs comes up and like, oh, well, these guys seem to really know what they're doing and know what they're talking about. So I think they're the best example of it. But the thing about it now, Kerry-Ann, is, and I'm not sure really of outside of Jamaica. I'm pretty sure it exists outside of Jamaica, but I know for sure in Jamaica, there's this stigma, there's this fear of, well, what if they're putting out something and they're misrepresenting the brand, or it compromises the brand, because a lot of companies, especially big name companies, they want to control the narrative, even down to the employee level, even down to that individual level, where some employees aren't allowed to post certain things on their own personal page because they're connected to the brand. So I mean, how can we work around that where yes, you have the employee advocacy where you want them to post because it builds that engagement and as you said, that trust factor, that credibility factor. But then there's a balance of, well, how do I control what's being put out there without being too controlling? If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, it,
Right?
it, it totally does. It totally makes sense. And it's a very valid concern. And I would say, first of all, different companies do it differently.
Right.
There's some people that advocate for more personally generated content on the part of the employee, not so much dictating or providing the content to them because people feel that, it's more authentic that way, and I take that point. I think a couple of things companies just have to bear in mind, that again, your employees, they have their own personal brands whether we like it or not. And so the first thing that we'd have to recognize as a company is that we do need to put the kind of policies and strictures and structures in place to protect the brand. It's a valid concern. We're living in an age where one false word or move can totally annihilate a company or somebody's personal brand. So we do need to put the requisite social media policies in place to be able to make sure, the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And then once we have that in place, making sure that whoever is part of your advocacy program, that they are aligned with the brand. I mean, that's so very, very
Mm,
important. And I mean, it
mm,
sounds very airy fairy,
mm.
perhaps, but it's something you're really going to want to make sure you're clued in on, which is why internal marketing at the top is so very, very important, making sure that we're ultra clear with our employees about who we are, what we stand for, the vision, the mission, the values, making sure that they intimately understand the brand and how that brand is put out there and why we put the brand out there like that, and make sure that they're aligned with that, because if on a personal level there's something that's just not connecting with them. I mean, I work with a financial group, or founding core value or key core value is love. And so if as employees, for whatever reason, you're really not feeling this love thing, I don't love other people, I may love my mom, but I don't love the human race. If that's you, then we probably wouldn't want you as part of our employee advocacy program,
Right,
because
right.
it's not gonna come across as authentic when you start to share your content and engage with people. So make sure your employees are aligned. And then the next thing is that once you have the strictures in place, their alignment is there, and then you can determine, well, how can employees get access to content or generate content that's aligned again with who we are, and in keeping with the brand guidelines. So there are some companies that actually provide a library of content. There are great platforms around that companies can buy licenses to use, and then you have X number of licenses for how many employees are part of the program, and they can go onto the platform and pull down content for whatever reason or for whatever purpose, at any particular point in time. Some people are very structured to say, okay, it's a mortgage month, and we're going to be posting mortgage content. Everybody posted mortgage content in the month of June. I mean, some companies do that, and again, if you can do that authentically,
Right.
then by all means. But some companies just have a nice big bank of stuff that their employees can share. And then there are some companies that say, you know what, talk about whatever works for you. I did an episode recently where, some people use artificial intelligence to help them generate content. Some people want to write, but, coming up with that first draft is kind of difficult. So they use AI to help prompt them with that first draft, or maybe you need help with a catchy headline. Whatever it is, there are some companies that really like to give employees the freedom and the room to be able to generate that kind of personal content that is, again, aligned with not only the brand, the company brand, but again, the personal brand of the employee who is sharing it. So I would say those are kind of the basic steps, and you can do what works for you, but recognize that, again, buying from leadership is important ultimately to make it work, and that whether we like it or not, employees have their own personal brands anyway. So how we can leverage that brand and go along for the ride and enroll employees and make something awesome together, I think is a great opportunity that every company should leverage.
Yeah, and I like the point you made that not every employee needs to be a part of the program, because I think that's very important and a very key point. Because you don't want it, as you said, to come across as inauthentic, where you're forcing people to say, "Hey, this internal marketing thing, we're going to roll it out, and everyone needs to be a part of that program." No, it has to be people who are aligned. And I mean, you have some people that work within your company where, to be honest with you, they're not aligned on the company's values. I mean, they're just there to collect a paycheck. I mean, let's call it what it is. That's literally all they're there for. And once they do the work and go home, then they're not thinking about the company until the following morning. So just to shift gears a bit though, because what I really want to know or hear about is the story of your podcast, and how that actually got started. What was the inspiration behind it, why you decided to do an internal marketing podcast, which, by the way, before you actually started doing it, I had never really, one, I've never heard the term internal marketing, and two, I've never seen anyone else doing it. But ever since you started doing it, then I started realizing one or two people kind of pop up here and there on LinkedIn started talking about it. So probably you can walk us through that story, or share that story with us.
Wow. Okay. Well, it could be a very long story, but I'm
We
just
probably
gonna
should have
try.
started with that.
Yeah, you know what I mean. But let me keep it as tight as possible. I mean, you said earlier that I have several years of marketing experience, and I thank you so much for youthening my age, right? Because I have more than several years of, fortunately or unfortunately, been in this marketing thing for a while. And I guess I'd reached a stage in my career, honestly, where I said, um, how can I give back to the marketing community? I'd really always been a very private person. I've been on LinkedIn for several years and never posted content even once. So for me, I was like, well, how do I give back to the community? Yeah, there's an opportunity to always build your personal brand. And I'm not going to lie, that was certainly in the forefront of my mind as well. But the question then became, well, what conversation do I have? You know, and it was through a conversation, an experience I had with one of my mentors, big up Paul Carrick Brunson,
Right.
whose charge at the time was, what conversations are marketers not having really? What problems or challenges is the marketing community facing that no one else really seems to be talking about and digging into? And he gave us a whole exercise of how we could kind of go about unearthing what those could be. And again, to cut a long story even shorter, through that exercise, I had some conversations with a lot of great people, including a few CFOs, right?
Right.
And I came out with this thing called internal marketing. Now, obviously, I didn't make up the name. It's been around for a while, but I realized it was a thing. There was a book written about it. Probably the first book written about it was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, but nobody was really talking about it. And I kept meeting so many employees of companies in other functional areas apart from marketing who were frustrated with the marketing function or the marketing strategy of the company that they worked for. And I realized that for a lot of what their maladies would have been, the remedy, or one of the remedies, would have been internal marketing, which is how are we engaging employees to align themselves with the brand, to align themselves with the mission and the vision. And again, how can we enroll them and empower them to partner with the marketing function to build the brand and all of what that could be? When you talk about ultimately building a marketing culture in a company, that's a powerful thing. So it no longer becomes, well, brand building is marketing's job, which we
Right.
know it isn't, but it now becomes everybody's job. And like you said, thought about, do I do a blog? Do I do something? I also like to write, but I also like to have conversations like this, right? And I said, podcasting. Somebody said podcasting. I'm like, oh my God, could I do a podcast? And again, I Googled, is there something called an internal marketing podcast? No, there were a few podcasts that may have had an episode or two about internal marketing, but there was none. And I said, I am going to jump out on a limb and do it again. I don't think it's enough of a conversation that people are having, but you're right. More people are talking about it. More people, especially, are talking about the employee advocacy side.
Right,
But internal marketing leads to employee advocacy.
right,
Employee
right,
advocacy is
right.
basically the objective or the outcome of or one of the outcomes of internal marketing. And it's been an awesome journey so far, especially unpacking so many aspects to it. Again, I'm only about 9 or 10 episodes into my own podcast. So talking about, engaging employees in crisis or employee advocacy or how to build your company brand on LinkedIn, all these different facets of internal marketing ultimately. And it's just been an awesome journey. And I hope that the conversation continues to pick up steam because, as I said, coming out of this pandemic, when people are just so dying to be reconnected to humans in a more powerful way, in a more authentic way, brands have to be enrolled or aligned around a purpose. It really comes down to, well, how are brands going to do a much better job of engaging and authentically connecting with their consumers. And the way they do that is not just slapping up a logo on a LinkedIn page, it's enrolling and empowering their employees, who are really the ultimate representatives of the brand, to do that, to drive that engagement and build that community. So yeah, there we go.
Awesome. I love that story. Um, I love. Here's why I say I love it, because you didn't just wake up one day and say, well, I want to talk about internal marketing, so let's talk about that. It started with, well, what are the conversations that is not happening within the marketing community, and how can you be the voice of I guess voice of reason, if you want to call it that, to really bring this conversation to the forefront and get more people paying attention to it. So I love that. I love anything that's birthed out of serving a need in the community, especially marketing.
Yeah.
So let's say someone actually wanted to implement these steps. Like, all right, so we get that internal marketing is important. We see its value, it's important, whether to the bottom line or to getting employees more engaged in the brand and work. What are some of the steps that you would recommend that an organization starts doing? Like, probably could give us like the top, or not the top, but the first three steps to actually implementing some sort of internal marketing program.
Sure, no problem. I mean, there, as you rightly said, there are a few steps, right? But I mean, first of all, and again, I'm on this journey myself with my own organization. As I said, GMMB Group, we founded on love, and the first thing that I know we had to do was to make sure to reconnect with what our brand stands for. That's the first thing. What's your brand story? Is it clear? Is it well understood? Is it well articulated? Just to make sure that we double down on who we are and what we stand for. I think that's the first step, because before you start to enroll anybody as a brand, as a company, you need to be clear about who you are. Another thing that we had to do was we really had to look at, well, how are we engaging our employees? We had to do a temperature check on the ground, because while we are very clear about what our brand is and what we stand for, and we know that when we hire team members, folks to be a part of the team, we are hiring the right people as best as possible, especially in terms of values alignment of their personal values and the company values. We had to do a temperature check, and it's something I recommend as well, with how employees feel about the brand still. Because, as there's a saying that seeing me and versus coming to live with me are two different things. So these are employees who live, work, and breathe with each other every day. How do they feel about the brand 2, 3, 5, 10 years in? Do they believe that we are what we stand for? Do they feel engaged? Do they understand what the brand is all about? Are they empowered to be able to deliver on the client experience or the promise that we give to our clients? We have to do that temperature check to make sure there are no gaps there. And then, of course, we also reach out to folks who want to be a part of this thing, part of an employee advocacy program. And at the same time, making sure we're doing the kind of internal communication necessary to support a broader engagement of our employee base, while at the same time enrolling and empowering people who have raised their hands to be a part of the advocacy journey. So we would have had awesome times together, like personal branding workshops to get them to understand how to define and promote their own personal brands, what it means to be an advocate of the company brand, and just really creating a sense of community with how we engage each other on this advocacy journey, which not only benefits the company, obviously, but it benefits them. And I think that for me is probably the most gratifying part of the journey so far, is that engaging these advocates, we're kind of like a little family. We have a WhatsApp chat group, we're exchanging tips with each other on ways to build your personal brand, how LinkedIn works, the algorithm, what it takes to win on Instagram, etc. And it's been awesome to see the transformation even in themselves, because that's the what's in it for them too, is
Right.
that they get to put themselves out there. For a lot of them, they wouldn't have been out there in a powerful way, or maybe they were at one point and they kind of shied away from it. But it's just been so gratifying to see how they have evolved and how they've built and grown their own personal brands. And again, the company brand gets to go along for the ride. So it's been a great journey so far. And that's how I recommend companies kind of level set to get started.
Awesome. And just piggybacking on that, probably you could share with us some, if you can, that is some things that you've learned, trying to, or going through the process of implementing this within your own organization that you work for. Just some things that you've learned, whether mistakes or things that you didn't expect, that you're like, oh wow, that's a light bulb moment for me, that you've learned along the journey so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah, absolutely. Two big lessons learned, and we say it, but we don't ordinarily do it. But leadership buy-in is critical, right?
Right.
And let's be straight. It's not that anybody doesn't want to get leadership buy-in on something like this. It's just, I'll be very honest and say, usually when you're implementing something that's new like this, that people don't really quite understand yet, and in the midst of all the other company priorities, internal marketing with a supporting employee brand advocacy program is not a big priority on a lot of CEOs' lists, right? But having the buy-in, and also seeing how you can even encourage leadership. You spoke about Refine Labs. I did a post on LinkedIn a few weeks back about their CEO, Chris Walker, because somebody asked me to start sharing examples of folks on LinkedIn who do employee advocacy very well. And I said Chris Walker, who's the CEO of Refine Labs, was great because he, like Megan, like MJ, they provide valuable content, full stop. They're not selling anything. They're not telling you, well, click here and fill out a form. It's not gated content. They're just really all about providing valuable content every day. And what's profound to me is that he's a CEO. He could
Right.
be doing so many other things, right? He's the CEO. He obviously has a team to support him, and he says that very clearly in his content too. But the fact that he so believes in putting valuable content out there, and again, the Refine Labs brand goes along for the ride, I think it's a great example. And Megan is their CCO, their Chief Customer Officer. So clearly you got the executives all lined up with that vision.
Right.
And I think that's the first thing. And then the next lesson is how to utilize technology as well. And some companies may not want to go the route of purchasing a license or investing in a technology in the early days of what probably could be a pilot for an employee advocacy program, and I get that. But the sooner you can incorporate a technology platform that brings people together, where they can access company information that they can either use directly or repurpose for their own personal postings on social media, what have you, I think it's a great investment, because it really makes that communication flow and information and content sharing so much easier. So those are the two big lessons for
Yeah.
me.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think I'd love to end on this note. Based on something you just said, one of the big learnings for you was, the importance of leadership buy-in. But also you said, which is very true. I mean, just keeping it real, that this isn't a priority on the priority list for most CEOs. They're thinking about, as we said, P&L, profit and loss, how to bring in more business, how to keep the customers we already have to, um, increase that market share, if you want to call it that, over time. So, in your view, like, what do you think needs to happen for this mindset shift to take place, where CEOs start to see the value in internal marketing, employee advocacy, like a Chris? Like, what do you think needs to happen from the point of view? Let's use you as an example. Then what needs to happen from year end in order to make that mindset shift happen for CEOs to start to get buy-in? What do you think you need to do on your end for them to say, all right, yeah, carry on, we see the value in this, let's put some budget towards it to make it happen?
Yeah, wow. I think twofold. One, I think that we have to be straight as marketers. We're going to have to try and find a way to prove the value numerically, right? So,
As always.
as always, what can I say? We can't get away from it. So when we see the kind of reach and mentions that our brand enjoys, because we have so many employees out there with their tentacles in their networks, engaging and having conversations and so on, and if we can even go as far as utilizing your CRM to capture and track leads that we know come from these kinds of interactions, which again are far less expensive to acquire than a lead from an expensive advertising or otherwise marketing campaign. I think that's obviously one of the places where we're going to have to start. The second thing is, and I going back to the conversations about internal marketing, I think we need to start celebrating and highlighting case study examples of companies that, again, have done it very, very well. So you have smaller companies like a Refine Labs. Gong gets a lot of kudos on social media about, especially on LinkedIn, about how they do employee advocacy so very well. I've spoken about a couple of banks actually on my podcast that really focus on building that culture where employees all feel like they own the brand, and the
Right.
brand is something that they must carry through on and represent and build. And the stories are just amazing. And I think the more we start to share those stories, celebrate them, see the case studies, and again, coming out of this pandemic, as brands are looking to more efficiently and effectively and authentically engage and build communities, then I think people will start to see this whole thing called internal marketing very, very differently. And again, as you say, it's picking up steam. So let's see how we can prove the value numerically within our companies for those of us who are doing it. And then on the flip side, let's see how we can start sharing more of these case stories, as I like to call them, of companies that have been doing it so very, very well and are thriving because of it.
Right. Awesome. So, Kerry-Ann, before we actually go, or should I say before you go, probably share with us, how can people find the internal marketing podcast? Where can they go to click on and take a listen on what it offers?
Great. Thank you so much for that, Winston. So if you literally go on Google and type the Internal Marketing Podcast, you're going to see it. It's really available on your favorite podcasting app, right? So feel free to check us out there. I have an Instagram page. I have a LinkedIn page for the podcast. I have a Twitter page as well. So check it out. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter as well, Kerry-Ann Betton Stimpson or Kerry-Ann Stimpson. So easily found. And just, yeah, take a listen, subscribe if you like it, leave an awesome rating and review, and feel free to connect. I just love to connect with people who are passionate or even curious about this whole thing called internal marketing. So feel free to reach out and connect on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to continue the conversation there, and on Twitter as well.
One of the things I love about how you started is, you can just go in Google search and click on the internal marketing podcast, because you now own that term in terms of, from a search, podcast, content distribution standpoint, you actually own that term. So as it begins to pick up steam and people begin to research the internal marketing,
Mhm.
your podcast will definitely be one of the first ones to actually pop up in that Google search, which is great. Which
Yeah,
is great.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
it
jealous.
is. Well, what can I say? But it's just been an awesome journey, and again, my hope is that it will just continue to grow from strength to strength. I mean, yeah, the podcast is a vehicle to be just one aspect of the conversation, but that as more companies log on to this thing,
Right.
I think it has such powerful potential to be something awesome in the next phase of marketing history. Yeah. So
All right. Kerry-Ann, thank you again so much for coming on for talking with us about internal marketing. You know, I don't know if there's anything else you want to leave us with before you actually go. You know, it's always great hearing from you.
thank you so much, Winston. I just I guess my last encouragement to anyone listening, especially if you're in the marketing field, is do a temperature check of your employees.
Hmm.
I think one of the things I've learned on this journey is that when we think employees or people issues, we think HR. And marketing doesn't always tune into our employees, don't tune into the people of our organizations that we work so hard to represent and build a brand for. We're not taking enough time to do the necessary employee insights and temperature checks of how they're doing, especially in a time like what we're living in. So do that temperature check, making sure that your employees feel empowered, feel engaged, understand the brand, and are able to represent that brand. Because the reality is we could be spending all this time and energy promoting the brand to the customer. If our employees aren't aligned, then what the customer feels and engages when we tell them to come on in and experience this great brand, there's going to be a complete disconnect, and we would
Right.
have wasted our time and money. So do that temperature check and make sure the dots are connected.
Awesome. All right, Kieran, thanks again. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Conversation with Marketers. Take care and all the best. Goodbye.